Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Putin announces a temporary ceasefire for VE Day, hours after Trump expresses his disappointment in the Russian leader. Millions of Canadians head to the polls for the country's snap election. And Roman Catholic cardinals will meet for conclave on the 7th of May as they elect a new pope. To our top story, and Vladimir Putin has announced a temporary ceasefire to pause fighting in Ukraine to coincide with the anniversary of VE Day. It comes after President Trump criticized the Russian leader, saying he was disappointed with Putin after the latest strikes on Ukraine and called on him to reach a deal. The US president spoke to reporters after having private talks with Ukraine's President Zelensky in Rome at the weekend, something he referenced before boarding Air Force One. Take a look.
I think the meeting went well. We'll see what happens over the next few days. We'll probably learn a lot. I was very disappointed that missiles were flying by Russia, but that missiles were flying. Very disappointing. We'll see how it goes. Well, I want them to stop shooting, sit down and sign a deal. And we have the confines of a deal, I believe, and I want them to sign it and be done with it and just go back to life.
I'm now joined by former US diplomat and lecturer on Russian foreign policy at Johns Hopkins University, Donald Jensen. Donald, great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us. Firstly, what are Putin's motives for the VE Day ceasefire, and why wait until the 8th of May?
Well, Putin is playing the West, he's playing the United States, and he's trying to play, as they say, the Ukrainian side. Putin just called a ceasefire a week ago, immediately violated it, as President Trump just said, by attacking Ukrainian civilians. And now he's trying to get some international attention by having the Victory Day ceasefire next week. But given his behavior last week, who knows whether it will even be observed. So I would not take it all that seriously, except as perhaps a day-long pause, nothing more, and the fighting will likely go on, as will the talks.
Why did Trump change his approach on Ukraine? Was it because of his meeting with the Zelensky at the Vatican? Or do you think it's really frustration with what appears to be a stalemate in these talks?
Well, I think President Trump is finding out that this is far more difficult than solving in a few days. I think the president is now more uncertain than he has been about Putin's good faith, something that he and Envoy Witkoff talked about many times earlier. Putin has no interest in a peace deal on anything other than Russian terms, and many people have criticized the so-called U.S. plan for leaning too far to Russia. The Europeans are strongly against, and I was pleased to see a good atmosphere in the talk between Zelensky and Trump in the Vatican, but there is almost no chance Zelensky will accept a turnover of Crimea to Russia. And that means essentially that the Trump plan is seriously wounded.
So I just wanted to pick up on that point when it comes to Crimea. Donald Trump says he thinks Volodymyr Zelensky is ready to give up Crimea. But why do you think this is something that is not going to happen? And do you think both Ukraine and the European Union are going to make sure Crimea isn't part of Russia going forward in these U.S. plans?
Yeah, well, Crimea is not part of Russia, and I think I want to hear the Ukrainian president say he would give it up, and I'm absolutely certain, given his own statements before, absolutely certain, given the political pressures at home, he will not turn over Crimea legally to the Russians. And as you might have seen in the past several days, both President Macron and the British Prime Minister are both, I think, strongly opposed to turning Crimea over to Ukraine. And in many ways, that's a key to any deal going forward. So again, I'm pessimistic that it will go forward according to the U.S. outlines we've seen. Where it goes afterward is not clear, because Putin, in many ways, has not compromised at all from his position at the beginning of the war. All these conditions, all this maneuvering is really just to prolong, weaken the U.S., divide the West, and prolong the process so the West will eventually get tired of dealing with the Russian positions, which are pretty severe. And Foreign Minister Lavrov even said that on U.S. television yesterday.
So Donald Trump tomorrow would have been in the White House for 100 days. He obviously said he could end this in 24 hours. It was a war he would have not let happen if he was the president at the time. Where does this leave Donald Trump and his policy? And do you think he's starting to regret what he said in many ways?
Well, he's backed off it already. You saw earlier last week, he said he was really speaking in hyperbole and indicating he didn't really mean he could end it in 24 hours. But the president has some serious decisions to make, one of which is that if the Russians continue to show bad faith, does he walk away from it? The crisis, the problem in Ukraine, the fighting, which several people have indicated he might do, or does he bolster U.S. support for Ukraine? And this will probably come to a head over the issue of whether there is a European reassurance force deployed in Ukraine under any ceasefire, and they want, the European allies want, a U.S. insurance behind that to ensure that the Russians are serious. So the president has some serious decisions to make, and it's not clear yet which way he will go.
Donald, what more have we heard about other countries assisting Russia's war effort? North Korea has confirmed it did send some troops.
Well, in fact, President Putin congratulated North Korea for its help and congratulated the country for, among a number of other things, and indicated that he wants a deeper security ties with North Korea. Well, that's all very interesting, and it shows how uninterested Russia is in an actual settlement. But it also shows how Russia has some manpower shortages of their own. And there's a lot of bravado coming out of the Kremlin, but they have their concerns, their weaknesses too. And for the time being, at least, President Putin thinks that North Korean bodies being killed at the front helps the Russian war effort. Perhaps it does. More likely, it's not going to help materially one way or the other. Even in Kursk, where they have helped try to kick the Ukrainians out.
According to the Ukrainian Air Force, Russia launched 166 drones at Ukraine today. Who has the upper hand on the battlefield currently?
I think I would go back to the testimony of the NATO commander, Chris Kovally, a few weeks ago, which is to say Russia has the upper hand, but Ukraine is nowhere near in danger of collapse. And you hit on exactly the right point, which is that this war of drones is actually a war in which the Ukraine has an advantage. Higher tech drones, effectively targeting not civilians like the Russians do, but attacking Russian targets of military or energy and those kind of things. And you probably saw the Ukrainians unleashed an attack overnight against Russia. So this is going to go on. And we used to talk about artillery 2 years ago, but now we talk about drones. So Russia may have the upper hand. It's slowly creeping forward, but I would by no means say that the war is going to end in its favor anytime soon.
Donald Jensen, a former U.S. diplomat and lecturer on Russian foreign policy at Johns Hopkins University, an absolute pleasure to have your insights. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Now, millions of Canadians head to the polls today as the country takes part in a snap election. Reigning Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Party, Mark Carney, is hoping to hold onto his title after taking over from predecessor Justin Trudeau just last month. He's up against Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Current polls indicate Carney is seen as a preferred choice to go toe-to-toe with Trump, having held previous high-profile positions as governor Governor of both the Bank of England and, of course, of the Bank of Canada. For more on this, I'm joined from Toronto by National Post columnist Anthony Furey. Anthony, great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. So voters are heading to the polls today, but the last day of campaigning was overshadowed by a vehicle attack in Vancouver. What more do we know about this?
Yeah, a very unfortunate incident. There's information still coming out slowly. Right now, we know that there's an alleged perpetrator who has been arrested, a 30-year-old man, and police have said he's known to police. They've had many altercations with him, and there is belief that he's a mentally ill person in terms of his interactions with police. Videos surfacing online of him at the scene of the crime, being there, being confronted by a lot of people, frustrated with him, but he looks almost perplexed at the incident that happened. An absolute tragedy in this country, a vehicular attack at a Filipino cultural festival in Vancouver on the west side, the Pacific side of Canada. So definitely a country really in mourning right now as people try to figure out what happened and why it happened, and as many families and a whole community try to piece their lives back together after this tragedy.
Yes, indeed, Anthony. Thank you for that. Let's move on to politics. And the Liberals are ahead of the Conservatives in the latest polls. Polls always have this margin of error. But what has dominated each party's election campaign in Canada?
Yeah, and the polling issue has been a contentious one that a lot of people have debated and questioned the veracity of it, and then given other people criticism for going on to question the veracity of it, because not too long ago, the Liberal Party was very unpopular at the polls when Justin Trudeau was Prime Minister just a few months ago. And then Mark Carney came in. He became Prime Minister, and he was just PM for a few weeks before an election was triggered, before he decided to go to the polls to have this election. And then the public opinion polling has turned around, putting him in the lead slightly, almost within the margin of error with the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre. And this came after Justin Trudeau had been in office for 10 years, and a lot of people wanted change. When it comes to the main policy planks, if anything, right now, this is an election about personalities, three personalities: Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, Liberal leader Mark Carney, and Donald Trump, who has been threatening to make Canada the 51st state. He's been saying that rhetoric the past few months, and that's been dominating how Canadians talk about this election and even a couple smaller elections that we've had in the country.
So, Anthony, I wanted to talk to you about your latest column. You say the whole reason Donald Trump can speak about absorbing Canada is because, in business terms, our country is so mismanaged and underperforming. Mark Carney is a man who spent so many years in the top jobs in the finance world. Why do you think he isn't the right person to save Canada from economic decline?
Yeah, it's very tragic that Canada is actually dropping in so many of the key quality of life indicators and indexes that we typically talk about. OECD rankings, for example, we would have been in the top half a dozen categories in many of those, and we've dropped into the 20s, into the 30s in some of these rankings. Quality of life is really going downhill, and younger Canadians are particularly concerned and upset about their future. And now it's younger Canadians who are ranking the Conservatives as their top choice, and older people who are more sticking with the Liberal Party. And why I write in my column that Mark Carney is not my preferred choice, and I'm encouraging people to support the Conservative candidate, is because Carney is quite consistent with the past 10 years of Liberal governance. A lot of the policies are very similar, and he does appear to have the same philosophical outlook. While he is a businessman, an economist, and a banker, he does seem to believe in more top-down government control of the economy than many other people on Wall Street or Bay Street, which is our version of Wall Street here in Canada. And he is very involved in green finance and the green economy at a time when a lot of interest is waning from all of that, and people want to go in a more free market direction. And that is what Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre embraces in terms of getting the Canadian economy really back in fighting form.
So just give me your thoughts on why Pierre Poilievre is the right person to get Canada out of what you call the rut it appears to be in now. What is his forward thinking bringing to the table?
Well, Canada under Justin Trudeau unfortunately had a lot of very left-leaning policies. While he was the centrist party in the Liberal Party, he took that very left wing in terms of economic positions. And Pierre Poilievre is a much more economic growth-minded leader in terms of giving businesses and entrepreneurs and our oil and gas sector the freedom they need and the regulatory environment to go out and create opportunities, to go out and attract capital investment to Canada in much more of a hands-off way, to sort of unleash the powers of our various sectors. He's very focused on that, whereas the Liberal Party has been much more controlling and hands-on with different sectors of our economy. We have a lot of reserves of oil and gas, and one thing that really frustrates many Canadians, particularly Western Canadians in the provinces where we have the oil and gas reserves, is that we have not been able to get that product to market. And yet it is so valuable for jobs and opportunities. It's our key resource.
Anthony Furey, columnist at The National Post in Toronto. Great to have your insights. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks very much.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. A major power outage has hit large parts of Spain and Portugal, affecting traffic lights, transport and ATMs. Madrid's Barajas International Airport was left without power, while telecommunications have also been affected. The mayor of Madrid has warned people to stay off the streets. A Portuguese electricity operator says the outage was caused by a rare atmospheric phenomenon related to variations in temperature. 68 bodies have been recovered and 47 others were wounded in Yemen after a US strike on Sada hit a detention center housing African migrants. Sada is a Houthi stronghold that has also been previously targeted in US airstrikes. Washington has pledged to continue its attacks on the Houthis until they cease assaults on Red Sea shipping. Australian Prime Minister candidate Peter Dunt has sparked outrage after calling for the ban of Indigenous welcome ceremonies. Dutton, who is running in the upcoming election, says Aboriginal tradition should not be performed at sporting games or military commemorations. Dutton says he wants to change how Indigenous history is acknowledged if he is elected on Saturday. And Kim Kardashian's robbery trial has begun in Paris today. 10 men held the reality star at gunpoint and stole jewelry worth $10 million in 2016. 5 of the accused faced armed robbery and kidnapping charges, whilst the others are charged with complicity in the heist and the unauthorized possession of a weapon. Kardashian is due to testify on May the 13th. China has rejected claims by President Trump that he received a phone call from Chinese leader Xi Jinping at a press briefing in Beijing. China's Foreign Ministry reiterated that the two sides have not engaged in tariff negotiations. It comes as reports emerge saying Chinese e-commerce giants are ramping up prices of its products for the American market ahead of tariffs. Patrick Fox reports.
Well, the headline on some reports today, Shein hikes prices as much as 377% ahead of tariff increases. Things weren't quite as drastic as that. That was the maximum increase on one item for the American market, specifically for a 10-piece set of kitchen towels, but it was still dramatic. The average price for the top 100 products in the beauty and health category, according to a study by Bloomberg, went up by 51%, with several items more than doubling in price. So American consumers, certainly those that shop on some of these Chinese e-commerce platforms, are likely to feel the pinch. Shein, along with Temu and others, face a 120% tariff on many of their products after the Trump administration shut something known as the de minimis loophole, which allowed exporters to ship goods valued below $800 to enter the US without tariffs or custom duties. E-commerce players have made vast profits selling cheap goods made in China to Americans and elsewhere around the world. And this was something that the Trump administration was determined to halt. But this development highlights efforts by Chinese exporters to pass at least some of the extra costs on to U.S. consumers. Meanwhile, no signs of any breakthrough in engagement between Washington and Beijing, despite claims by the U.S. president otherwise. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Gui Jia-kun said today, to my knowledge, there has been no phone call between the two heads of state recently. The focus now is turning on China's economy czar, He Lifeng, who is said to be pulling the strings behind the scenes on negotiations between the two sides. Reports suggest he is not going to budge reducing China's trade surplus with the US, which is going to make it difficult to come to any sort of agreement. But Beijing may just be happy to wait things out. Reports suggest Americans are getting increasingly concerned about the inflationary impact of tariffs and the trade war. Businesses are also reporting that people are scaling back some purchases, and recent polls are showing voters feel President Trump is falling short on promises to strengthen the economy as he nears 100 days in office.
Patrick Falk in Singapore, thank you so much. Let's take another look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. President Trump has said the death of Prince Andrew's accuser, Virginia Giuffre, is a horrible thing. Giuffre's family said she lost her life to suicide at the age of 41. Authorities say her death is still under investigation but does not appear to be suspicious. More than 40 people have died and 1,200 are injured after a powerful explosion at Iran's biggest port of Bandar Abbas. The blast on Saturday shattered windows and damaged goods inside the shipping containers. Firefighters have been tackling the blaze, which is thought to have been caused by an explosion of chemical materials. India has agreed to buy 26 Rafale fighter aircrafts from France in a deal worth $7.14 billion. The purchase, intended for India's Navy, was approved earlier this month by the country's Security Cabinet. India has pledged to modernize its military and reduce its dependence on Russian equipment. And Jeddah's historic Old Town has become a tourist attraction following the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix. The Red Sea port hosted famous faces like Formula One star Lewis Hamilton and global singer Jennifer Lopez earlier this month. Known in Arabic as Al Balad, the town is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The government has also revealed plans to restore around 650 buildings and revive the region's local businesses. Roman Catholic cardinals will start electing a new pope from the 7th of May. 135 cardinals from all over the world are eligible to take part in conclave to decide the next leader of the Catholic Church. The announcement comes days after the funeral of Pope Francis withdrew 400,000 people to St. Peter's Square in Vatican City. We can now speak to Italian journalist Elena Trabottoni, live from Rome. Thank you so much for joining us, Elena. How does the conclave process work?
Well, it's a really interesting process. It's steeped in tradition and all these ancient rites, and it's been going on forever, really, 2,000 years. The Catholic Church is one of the oldest institutions in the world, along with some other religions. And basically, only cardinals under the age of 80 can vote. So we have some 135 that can vote, actually 134, because one has remained in Spain due to health reasons, out of a total of 235. And these cardinals are basically secreted away into the Sistine Chapel with those magnificent Michelangelo ceilings, frescoes above them. And they're put under lock and key, as it were. In fact, the name Conclave comes from the Latin cum clave, which means to be locked up, lock and key. And they are not allowed to keep in contact with the outside world. They vote 4 times a day until they reach a 2/3 majority. And the way they communicate with the outside world, because they're not allowed internet, they're not allowed to go out for dinner in the evening. They all have to have dinner together in Casa Santa Marta, which is the priest's residence where Pope Francis lived. The way they communicate, whether the Pope has been chosen or not, is through the release of burning of the scrolls, the ballots that they voted with, and either white smoke comes out in the case that a decision has been made, or black smoke. So that's where we'll be keeping our eyes and our television cameras pointed towards in the next few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. I know everyone is going to be watching out for that smoke very, very closely. But what are the key steps and traditions that will mark the start of the May the 7th conclave?
Well, for a start, the cardinals meet on May the 7th and they hold a mass, and then they hold a formal procession and they walk together to the Sistine Chapel. And on the first day, they will not be holding 4 voting polls. It'll just be one. So that first day, it'll just be one. But bear in mind that, there's a series of other things that need to be done. The area there, the Sistine Chapel, needs to be swept for recording devices because, albeit, it's an ancient tradition, but they want to take modern precautions. They need to install the special purpose chimney and the stove where you burn the ballot boxes. It's a stove back from 1903, I think the last one, and it's been fixed and revised several times, obviously, to be able to cope with the decades. So there'll be all these things being put in motion. And of course, in the evening, there's some rules, some quite archaic rules. For example, I'm told that from Vatican sources that the cardinals can only have one serving in their evening meal and at lunch, possibly to keep them, nimble and on their feet and not getting sleepy at the time of votes. And also the seating arrangements are quite randomized. So, every day the seating arrangements change, and they don't, so as to avoid people getting unduly influenced. Now, what's particular about this particular conclave is that 80% of those voting, 80% of the 135, were appointed by Pope Francis. So of the total voters, 53 are European, and the rest are from other areas of the world. So 17 from South America, 18 from Africa. And so it's very interesting because it's one of the most wide-reaching geographically conclaves ever, with cardinals from countries that never used to have cardinals in the past or haven't had them recently. So Rwanda, Myanmar, Haiti were appointed recently, and many of them don't actually know each other. They'd never met each other until this week, until they all rushed to the Vatican, called for the conclave, because about 20 of them were actually named as in December last year. So it's a very interesting mix of personalities and cardinals.
Helena, absolutely fascinating. But how long is the election process actually expected to take? How long are these new friends and cardinals expected to sit together and make a decision?
That's a very, very tricky one and a very, very good question, because it means, that until that moment, the Catholic Church is without a leader. It's in this sort of vacuum period. It's called the interregnum period, where the Vatican Chamberlain carries out very ordinary activities, but nothing else. It can take anything, really. I mean, there was one conclave that took 3 years. Fortunately, it was back in the Middle Ages, but they have been known to take a long time. The most recent ones, so Pope Francis's conclave took just under 2 days, as did Benedict's. So the hope is that it'll be smooth sailing. Of course, you never know until you see that white smoke.
And sometimes it comes out grey at the beginning, and that's also a little bit confusing. But with the College of Cardinals more diverse than ever, something you told me a little bit earlier, what challenges or opportunities might this present for electing the new Pope? There's also a bit of an issue over a cardinal who is protesting. He wants to vote, but is actually not being permitted to. What's going on?
Well, there's always some, controversy surrounding the conclave. It wouldn't be a conclave without, a lot of speculation and controversy. Now, this particular cardinal was he was actually charged with financial, mismanagement, and he's actually appealing that decision because he was actually sentenced to 5.5 years, but it's still an appeals process. And he says, and Vatican analysts say he's got a very good point, that Vatican law doesn't ban him from actually taking part in the conclave. Now, it was expected today when the cardinals met that they would address this issue, and they didn't. They set the dates, but they said they didn't address the issues surrounding Cardinal Becciu's participation or not. Cardinal Becciu is Sardinian, and he's very present. He's Italian, and he's always been here in Italy in recent months and years. So, and he was also in charge of appointing and naming saints in the past. So, there is that issue. And then there's a secondary issue, a second parallel matter that's under discussion and that's keeping a lot of people busy and concerned, is that whilst Pope Francis's legacy is that one very much of, a progressive Catholic Church, open to the world, spreading out to the four corners of the world. And, he took such a sort of inclusive pastoral approach that many people that had been alienated from a distant church in past decades actually came back to the folds of the Catholic religion during Pope Francis's pontificate. Now, there are many, not a majority, I would say, but there are, a strong group that, a firm, solid group that say that the Catholic Church perhaps now needs to have a more conservative pontifex at its helm. The Pope obviously is not just a spiritual leader, he's also a political leader. He's the head of the Vatican City State, which is the smallest state in the world, albeit embedded in the capital city of Rome physically, but it's still a national country, a sovereign state on its own right. And there are some that are calling for a more conservative leader at the helm. So a sort of a break with Pope Francis's legacy. So these are some of the things that are at stake at the moment, that people are talking about at the moment. And we shall see. There are quite a few contenders, quite a few names out there of potential popes and pontiffs, figures. But there's a saying in Italian, which is you go in to the conclave as a pope because, speculation has it that you will be voted in, and you come out as a cardinal. That's to say that there's always a lot of surprises with these conclaves.
Italian journalist Elena Trabottoni in Rome. Great to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Israel has been accused of breaking international law by refusing aid into the Gaza Strip at the International Court of Justice in The Hague today. Israel cut off all food and medical supplies to 2.3 million Gazans on the 2nd of March in order to pressurize Hamas to release the remaining hostages. The US, as well as Germany, France and the United Kingdom, have called on Israel to allow aid into the Strip. We can now go live to Tel Aviv to speak to our correspondent, Trent Murray. Trent, thank you so much for joining me. The ICJ has started hearings on Israel's humanitarian obligations in Palestinian territories. What more do we know?
Yeah, that's right, Leigh-Ann. Day one of these crucial hearings getting underway in The Hague today. And we know that this is a case which both sides really had been anticipating would be quite a major moment for Israel on the world stage. It is important to remember this is a separate case to the one you might recall last year that South Africa brought to the ICJ. This is a case which has been brought to the court by the UN themselves. They are accusing Israel of breaking their obligations as a UN member when it comes to their operations within the Gaza Strip, specifically around this question of the delivery of aid. Now, as you rightly say, back on March 2nd, Israel made made the decision to cut off all aid going into the Gaza Strip. That included, of course, food and medicine and other personal supplies for the Palestinians there. And they have maintained that blockade until this very day. Of course, that comes against a backdrop of warnings that the stockpiles that were in Gaza are now fast running out. The Palestinian representative today at the ICJ accused Israel of using hunger and food as a weapon of war, while the UN's legal council said that Israel had a clear legal obligation as the occupying force in Gaza to facilitate the delivery of aid there. Now, it is day one of these hearings. We are expecting to hear some more throughout the week, but certainly this has been a case which has been some time coming now, and which some 40 countries and international organisations are expected to submit their opinion on.
Trent, while Israel was not in court, the Foreign Minister Gideon Saar was speaking at a news conference. What did he say about the hearings that are going on?
Yeah, that's right. Gideon Saar, it would seem, deciding to litigate this through the press, at least through verbal arguments. At least the Israelis were not there for verbal arguments today. We understand they have submitted a written submission to the court, but certainly speaking at that press conference in Jerusalem, the Foreign Minister had some pretty strong language targeted at both the UN and the ICJ itself. He described this case as a circus and said that the UN's top court was being politicised, while at the same time the UN is failing to root out terrorists which are operating within the Palestinian refugee agency UNRWA. He also went on to say that the court is trying to force Israel to cooperate and work with an organisation that is, in his words, infested with Hamas terrorists. So some quite characteristically strong language there from the Israelis surrounding this case. I think they are aware that this is going to garner a lot of attention and a lot of scrutiny on their actions within the Gaza Strip. And certainly on day one, while they've not been in the court directly, they certainly have come out swinging in terms of rhetoric against this case even being brought at all.
Trent, it's likely going to take months for The Hague to rule. What does this mean for the people of Gaza amid the near collapse of the humanitarian aid system?
Well, look, the first thing to say is that rulings from these courts are only advisory at the outset. So whenever the court does make a decision, it will not be binding on the State of Israel to carry out its decision. But it does carry significant weight. And so in the meantime, of course, while those arguments are taking place, and as I said, we're expecting arguments and submissions from some 40 countries regarding this case, the people of Gaza, you would imagine, will just continue to live day in and day out experiencing what they've been experiencing now for well on 18 months. But we do know that international pressure as well, outside of the court, but at a more diplomatic level, is really building now on the State of Israel to open up those borders and allow food and medicine to be placed back into the Strip for the 2.3 million people living there. Germany, France, the UK in the past week have said they are calling on Israel now to end this blockade and to let aid back in. We've even heard President Trump reportedly has told Benjamin Netanyahu that it's time to let food back into the Gaza Strip.
Trent Murray in Tel Aviv, thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at the top business news. Shares of Toyota Industries are set for their biggest daily jump on record today. That's after Japanese automaker Toyota said it was considering a potential buyout of the key parts supplier, which has a market value of $28 billion. Toyota Industries has denied receiving a buyout offer from the Toyota chairman or the Toyota Group. Shares in British meal delivery company Deliveroo jumped 17% on Monday in the first trading session after receiving a $3.6 billion cash buyout proposal from US peer DoorDash. The US meal delivery group has suggested a 180 pence a share offer for the UK company. The two companies have virtually no overlap in international markets. Turning to all the sports news now, Arne Slot has become the sixth manager to win the Premier League in his first season after guiding Liverpool to a record-equalling 20th top-flight title. The Reds demolished Tottenham Hotspur 5-1 to seal the title. Liverpool have confirmed that a Premier League victory parade will take place at the end of the month. And Sunday's London Marathon set a world record for the number of finishes, eclipsing the previous mark set in New York last year. According to the Guinness World Records, a total of 56,640 runners crossed the finish line. The London Marathon was already the most popular in terms of ballot entries. A reminder of our top stories. Putin announces a temporary ceasefire for VE Day hours after Trump expresses his disappointment in the Russian leader. Millions of Canadians head to the polls for the country's snap election. And Roman Catholic cardinals will meet for conclave on the 7th of May as they do elect a new pope. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. We'll be back in a couple of hours' time with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.